We did have a fantastic question come in from Michael Dubner, a great writer up on the website, and it's about managing player exposures. And I think this is something that, like, if you're doing one draft or two drafts, obviously you're not going to be overly concerned about the exposure to players. But you've mentioned already, at the start of the show, how many drafts you've done this year. Myself and Shawn are doing a lot of drafts, and that can lead to, last year, the ongoing joke with myself was James Conner had it like 45% ownership, which at one point did start to concern me that it was way overweight. But he's wondering, how does your management of player exposures change when you're thinking about getting exposure to players you expect to be underweight on versus being disciplined with players you want to be overweight on? So I know you mentioned previously about, you have the clip when you're doing your draft shows, and if that opportunity comes up, you're going to draft them, but you also don't want to have 70% exposure to certain players. How do you weigh up that player exposure? And I know when you are doing the drafts, you are tracking the exposures. Is that something that's hard to keep up to date with as to across the platforms?
Yeah, and I should mention, Dubner has built some of his own tools for tracking, and he'll actually let us know in the ship chasing chat. Yeah, you guys are at 80% George Kittle through your 5 drafts, which is definitely something that happens for us specifically on stream. I do think about exposures a lot, although I will say I don't think about it a ton at the beginning of the offseason. Like, I'm not super concerned about it right now. We know how much ADPs can move throughout free agency in the draft. So I don't think getting overweight on guys early now is a problem. To me, what really becomes hard is then when we get to August and early September, right before the season starts, of how do you balance those things out? And that's where I really want to be cognizant of my exposures and making sure I'm not so overconfident. Like, let's just say, as an example, okay, I've been hammering Deontay Foreman. Let's just say in training camp, we start to hear, hey, Chuba is, splitting this backup work with him, and there's a path to Chuba being the pure handcuff for CMC. I want to make sure then that I'm really flexible and that I don't have 95% confidence Foreman's the true handcuff to Chuba, and I start mixing in Chuba, because I still have the same thesis that I want the handcuff to McCaffrey, but I have a little less certainty on it. So to me, it's when we get new information coupled with what I've already done, that's when I want to either mitigate risk or find out ways. Hey, I'm so heavy on Trey Sermon. If I'm wrong, what might actually be the player who benefits the most? Okay, maybe I want to start mixing in more Jeff Wilson or whoever that may be. So I think as the season goes on, I'm going to get more and more cognizant of my exposures and portfolio, and then really try to go out of my way to balance it a bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too as well, like at this early point, and I made a claim earlier about picking Alberto in the 20th round, but things are going to happen where players are now in the 12th round, and then come August they're going to be in the 9th round. So like factoring in things like that, and then the reverse of it, where a player may seem like they're a very overpriced now, but may drop down draft boards, and then we have to dip in to get some exposure to those as well. But the follow-up question he had was, are you willing to go 0% exposure on some of the most egregiously priced players? So I guess, are there players that under no circumstances are you really going to go and draft? Or are you willing to go out of your way to at least get some minimal exposure if they fall past ADP, kind of like what I touched on there, even if it's still earlier than where you would value, but if it's a case that maybe they're around to 14, 15 picks after ADP?
Yeah, I would say in differently than how I probably don't want 100% of guys. I am okay having 0% of guys, guys like you said that are really mispriced, or I just don't think have the ability to really burn me. And just looking at some of my teams that have had the most success, and last year, and I know on the Stealing Bananas, we were looking at my underdog team I drafted with Eric Bime for, and it didn't have any of those league winners on it, all of the top 5-6 win rate guys. And, that's really kind of driven home to me how much the structural advantage takes care of things, and that I don't necessarily feel like, oh, just because I don't have any Elijah Mitchell, let's say before the RotoViz draft, that I'm now going to go out of my way to get him just so I can say I have 1% Eli Mitchell. Because when you think about it that way, right? If Eli Mitchell has this smash year, I'm probably already buried on a lot of my teams. So what is having one extra share of him going to do? So I don't feel like I want to place all my bets around the roulette table evenly. If it's if I miss on that player, then I miss on him, and I'm not going to try to, make myself sleep a little easier because I grabbed one extra share.
It's interesting hearing you say that. I was reading through some of Blair's old Wrong Read articles recently, and one of the things that jumped out to me is that people were kind of talking about this topic and going through and strengths and weaknesses. And one of the best players in the world was saying he's actually worried more about over diversification than not having enough access. And for similar types of reasons, you can over diversify your way out of the win rates that you would have had by hitting on your guys. The other thing that happens for me is that you get into these situations where you've got just a couple of teams with some of these players you don't normally have. And then if they do well, it just creates such a huge problem because you're rooting against yourself so hard in some of these situations as you go into these big playoff types of contests. Now, in some ways that can be good if it carries you through. But like you said, it's hard if it feels like if this one team comes through, everybody else that you have is going to be dead. And so I like to have my guys in there.
Did you enjoy that clip? Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get more content from RotoViz. And of course, you can check out full-length podcasts at rotoviz.com/podcast. Available on all podcast platforms. Check out our wide range of content. Once again, rotoviz.com/podcast.